Eminem was stalked by the same man who broke into his properties 3 times over 6 years, repeatedly reaching him despite arrests and court orders. In 2019, the stalker broke into one of Eminem's former homes and told the new homeowner he was looking for his brother Marshall. In 2020, he escalated by entering Eminem's actual residence through an unlocked entry point while Eminem was asleep, later telling police he was there to kill him. After being arrested and convicted, the man returned again in 2024, once more breaching Eminem's property. Court records show the break-ins weren't the result of sophisticated planning, but repeated exploitation of access points and timing, highlighting how even high-level security measures can fail against persistent obsession. Eminem was unharmed, but prosecutors described the pattern as escalating and dangerous. A mummified carrier pigeon found inside a UK chimney in 1982 was carrying an encrypted World War II message from 1944 that's never been decoded. The pigeon likely died mid-mission during Britain's wartime communications and remained sealed in the chimney for nearly 40 years. Attached to its leg was a capsule holding a coded strip of letters and numbers believed to be connected to D-Day operations. Despite repeated attempts by historians and codebreakers, the message's meaning and destination remain unknown. Britain's intelligence agency GCHQ has confirmed the cipher is still unsolved and publicly asked for help deciphering it, leaving whatever information the pigeon was carrying permanently undelivered. In 1993, Sicilian Mafia boss Giovanni Brusca ordered the kidnapping of 12-year-old Giuseppe Di Matteo to silence his father, a former mob insider who had begun cooperating with authorities. Disguised as police, captors lured the boy away, promising to reunite him with his dad. He was held for 779 days in degrading conditions, often caged, beaten, underfed, and moved between hideouts, while photos of his suffering were sent to pressure his father into silence. When testimony continued, Brusca ordered the kill, dismissing the boy as the puppy. Giuseppe was strangled and his body dissolved in acid to erase all evidence. The murder shocked Italy because it shattered the long-promoted myth that the Mafia followed a code of honor that spared all children. But investigators in later trials revealed that this was never truly a rule, and Giuseppe's death became one of the most disturbing symbols of the Mafia's retaliation tactics during the 1990s crackdowns. In 2019, police uncovered an abuse case at the Danby House nursing home in North Carolina after staff were caught recording and encouraging violent confrontations between elderly residents with dementia. Investigators said workers laughed, filmed, and allegedly urged a 73-year-old man to attack a 70-year-old woman, shouting instructions like punch her in the face while she cried for help. Both residents required constant care and couldn't fully understand what was happening, turning a supervised environment into exploitation for entertainment. The footage led to criminal charges and renewed scrutiny over how vulnerable patients in long-term care facilities can be manipulated by caregivers. This Viking sword was found by reindeer hunters at a high altitude in the mountains of Norway. It may have belonged to a Viking who lost his way and died here around 1100 years ago. This 6-foot-long monster megalodon tooth was found off the coast of North Carolina. The North Carolina coast happens to be a known hotspot for prehistoric megalodon tooth findings. This good boy is named Dogor, and he's more than 18,000 years old. Found in Siberian permafrost, he's so well preserved that his whiskers and nose are still mostly intact. Florida high school principal Dr. George Kenney built a devoted following by hypnotizing students to boost confidence and performance despite not being licensed. But in 2011, 3 teens he had worked with died within months of each other, 1 in a car crash and 2 by suicide, raising alarm from families who believed the hypnosis may have caused psychological harm. Investigators never proved a direct link to the deaths, but Kenney was charged with practicing hypnosis without a license, pleaded no contest, and resigned in 2012. Lawsuits from the victims' families ended in settlements, while Kenney quietly left Florida and withdrew from public life, leaving the controversy unresolved. John C. Woods, the U.S. Army hangman who carried out the executions of Nazis at the Nuremberg trials, completely lied about his qualifications to get the job, claiming prior experience as an executioner when none of it could later be verified. As a result of his incompetence, several condemned Nazi officials did not die from a clean neck break, which is the intended outcome of a properly calculated drop. Instead, multiple prisoners slowly strangled in agony, some taking up to 20 minutes to die while witnesses observed visible suffering. Despite complaints from observers, Woods continued performing executions and was never formally disciplined for the botched hangings. In 1984, singer Marvin Gaye was shot and killed by his own father on the day before his birthday. He used a gun that Marvin had gifted him despite their sour relationship. Marvin was said to be suicidal at the time, so he hit his father during an altercation. His father always said that if any of his kids tried to hit him, he would kill them. He shot Marvin once in the chest and he was dead. When the first Star Wars movie premiered in 1977, France was still executing criminals with the guillotine. In 1967, 15-year-old James Gordon Wolcott shot and killed his mother, father, and sister after sniffing airplane glue. Today, he's an award-winning psychology professor and the head of the behavioral science department at a university in Illinois. Jordan James Park, the British influencer known as the Lip King, has died at age 34 after a suspected complication linked to a cosmetic procedure. Park gained notoriety for spending more than $150,000 on surgeries and even appeared on the reality show Botched, where doctors warned him about the risks tied to extreme fillers and repeated operations. Police are currently treating his death as unexplained, while a man and woman were arrested on suspicion of manslaughter as the investigation continues. The case has quickly sparked renewed discussion about the dangers of unregulated cosmetic work and the overwhelming pressure created by online beauty trends. In October of 2011, 2-year-old Wang Yu wandered into a market street in Foshan, China, where she was struck by a van and left critically injured in the road. Surveillance footage later showed dozens of pedestrians and drivers passing by without intervening before a second truck ran her over. After several minutes, a female waste collector finally moved her to safety, but the child tragically died a few hours later from her injuries. The case sparked worldwide debate about bystander behavior, public responsibility, and the social pressures that may discourage people from intervening in emergencies. Photographer Atif Saeed nearly got himself killed in order to capture this photo, which was taken just moments before the lion tried to attack him. He drove up to the lion, sat on the ground next to his car, and left the door open. The door being left open was the only reason he was able to escape unharmed. In case anyone is wondering what happened to the dinosaurs, here's what a baby blue heron looks like. The Bajau people of Southeast Asia are considered sea nomads. They have no homes, money, or nationalities, and they spend 60% of their time underwater. They can go spearfishing at depths greater than 200 feet without scuba gear or oxygen tanks. They've even developed much larger spleens than the average human thanks to evolution. In Philadelphia, Tammy Terrell began suffering severe migraines as a child after reportedly being assaulted at age 11. By 17, she was in a relationship with 30-year-old James Brown, who she later claimed physically abused her. In her early 20s, she became involved with David Ruffin, who she also described as violent, with accounts claiming he once struck her in the head with a motorcycle helmet. As her career with Marvin Gaye was taking off, she collapsed on stage in 1967, later diagnosed with a brain tumor. Over the next few years, she underwent multiple surgeries as the tumor kept returning. In March of 1970, at just 24 years old, she died after a long decline, with speculation that repeated head trauma may have contributed to or worsened her condition. A group of archaeologists discovered this bird claw while digging down a cave in New Zealand. Later on, they confirmed that it was the 3,300-year-old foot of a moa bird, which went extinct around 700 years ago. Oh no, someone's getting cursed. This power line in England happened to be laid straight through the skull of an Anglo-Saxon woman who was buried in a previously undiscovered graveyard from the 6th century. This ancient Aztec combat sword, known as the macabre, was made out of wood and obsidian rocks. Obsidian is 12 times sharper than surgical steel, as this sword could decapitate not only a man with one strike, but also a horse. A few days before he was assassinated, President Lincoln told several people about a dream he had. In the dream, Lincoln saw a soldier standing beside a casket, and he could also hear people weeping. Still dreaming, Lincoln asked the soldier, "Who's dead in the White House?" The soldier turned to him slowly and replied, "The president." In the late 1980s, a woman went on a vacation getaway where singles could meet other singles. She quickly thought she had met the man of her dreams and decided to sleep with him that night. When she woke up in the hotel room the next morning, the man was gone and there was a small wooden coffin on the table next to her. Inside was a note that read, "You are now HIV positive. Welcome to the world of AIDS." During World War II, JFK was stranded in the Solomon Islands and ended up carving a message into a coconut. A native islander delivered it to the closest US military base and saved his life. When he became president, Kennedy used the coconut as a paperweight on his desk in the Oval Office. This is a 1942 photo of Japanese troops using prisoners of war for target practice. During World War II, a German pilot spotted an American pilot's crippled plane in the sky. He noticed that the gunner was dead, the crew was injured, and that they didn't pose any threat. So instead of destroying the plane, he led it to safety and spared the men's lives. 40 years later, the two pilots reunited and became fishing buddies. This was the moment Icelandic singer Björk crashed out at Bangkok Airport in 1996, lunging at reporter Julie Kaufman and knocking her to the ground, moments after the reporter simply greeted her with the words, "Welcome to Bangkok." What appeared to be an explosive reaction to a harmless greeting was later explained by Björk as a breaking point. She claimed Kaufman had stalked her and her 9-year-old son for days across multiple locations, ignoring requests to stop. Björk said the airport encounter triggered fear for her child's safety. Kaufman denied any stalking, no charges were filed, and the footage became one of the most infamous celebrity confrontations of the 90s. On April 16, 2014, the South Korean ferry Sewol capsized and sank off the coast of Jindo while carrying 476 people, most of them high school students on a field trip. An abrupt turn combined with overloaded cargo caused the ship to list and rapidly flood. Passengers were repeatedly told over the intercom to stay where they were. Instructions most of them followed as water quickly filled the decks. The captain and several crew members abandoned ship early, leaving hundreds trapped inside. The ferry sunk in roughly 2 hours, killing 304 people, the majority of them teenagers. The captain was convicted of gross negligence and murder by omission and sentenced to life in prison, while multiple crew members and shipping company officials received prison terms. This was the moment a birthday party Spider-Man nearly died within seconds. He dives into the pool in full costume, but when he comes up, the mask is completely soaked and suctioned to his face. He quickly starts panicking and trying to breathe, while the kids think it's part of the act and continue splashing him. He gets out pretty quickly, but continues struggling to breathe since he can't free his face. He essentially waterboarded himself since the mask had trapped the water, making it impossible to breathe. Luckily, a few adults recognized what was happening and helped him pull the mask off before he suffocated. Here's a creepy clip of a dog making biting motions at its owner whenever she turns her back. Each time she turns away, the dog stiffens, locks onto her, and snaps at the air. According to Vets Online, this isn't playful behavior, but hesitation mixed with fear or low-level aggression. Dogs are more likely to test boundaries if they don't feel watched, especially if they're anxious or unsure. It's essentially a dog working up to a bite without fully committing, and trainers say behavior like this can escalate if it isn't addressed early on. 17-year-old Tyler Hadley murdered his parents for being too strict. He beat both of them to death with a hammer and then spent 3 hours cleaning up the crime scene. He then threw a house party with 60 people while the bodies were still in the bedroom. He even showed the bodies to a few friends, but was eventually caught due to word of mouth at the party. A 70-year-old man robbed a bank in Kansas City and then sat down in the lobby and waited for the cops to arrive. He said he'd rather live in jail than with his wife. In 1993, a Missouri man damaged a levee on the Mississippi River simply to delay his wife from coming home so that he could party. Instead, the river ended up flooding over 14,000 acres. The 23-year-old man was convicted for intentionally causing a catastrophe and was sentenced to life imprisonment. After being shot in the forehead by a drunk man and enduring an 8-year coma, policeman Gary Dockery suddenly woke up. He started talking enthusiastically, recognizing old friends and recalling events from past years. But by the very next day, he could no longer speak, and he slipped back into the same coma and never woke up again. In the 1980s, a family owned and operated a ceramics factory in California called Oscar Ceramics. But in 1987, the factory was revealed to be an illegal crematorium. This was only uncovered when a passerby, who happened to be a Holocaust survivor, recognized the smell of burning bodies from his time at Auschwitz. Here's a photo of an archaeologist cradling the cast of a young child who died instantly in the Pompeii eruption in 79 AD. The plaster casts of Pompeii's victims were created from empty voids in hardened ash, molds where human bodies once lay. Archaeologists filled them with plaster, revealing faces twisted in terror, immortalized in volcanic stone. A 3rd century BC Roman mosaic shows a skeleton reclining next to bread and wine, raising a cup with the words, "Be cheerful, enjoy life." In 2023, a 2,700-year-old 18-ton Assyrian statue was unearthed in Iraq, its massive form depicting a god whose worshippers died off millennia ago. It had waited underground since long before the birth of Jesus Christ. This portrait of an unidentified Egyptian man was laid over his mummified body nearly 2,000 years ago during the Roman period in Egypt. Painted on linden wood using colored wax, it was meant to preserve his likeness for eternity. Hidden for centuries beneath Italian forests, a massive Etruscan pyramid altar was rediscovered in the 1990s. Carved directly into rock 2,600 years ago, it may have once run red with the blood of ritual offerings to forgotten gods. Carved from mammoth ivory 33,000 years ago, this tiny bird from a prehistoric cave in Germany is the oldest known depiction of a creature. As far as we know, the artist who made it never lived to see a wheel, a written word, or the dawn of recorded history. In 2012, 2-year-old Maddox Durkosh was visiting the Pittsburgh Zoo and Aquarium with his mother when she lifted him onto a safety railing to get a better view of the African wild dogs. But the toddler soon lost his balance and fell 14 feet into the enclosure, which housed a pack of 11 dogs. Zookeepers and emergency responders rushed to intervene, but the animals quickly surrounded the child, and the attack lasted several minutes before zookeepers could drive them away. By the time rescuers had reached him, very little of Maddox had remained. Investigators later ruled the death a tragic accident, and the zoo temporarily closed the exhibit while reviewing safety procedures. In 1943, in Lyon, France, French resistance leader Raymond Aubrac was captured by the Gestapo and sentenced to death. But his wife Lucy organized a daring ambush to rescue him while he was being transported by Nazi officers. Resistance fighters attacked the convoy in broad daylight, killing several Gestapo agents and freeing Raymond along with other prisoners. The couple survived the war and remained married for more than 60 years, staying together until Lucy's death in 2007. Researchers off the coast of Tenerife have captured extremely rare footage of a black sea devil, a deep-sea anglerfish that usually lives thousands of feet below the surface, swimming in unusually shallow water. The black sea devil is almost never seen alive in daylight, and scientists say this may be the first ever recorded video of the species swimming near the surface. Its sudden emergence has left researchers completely baffled, since deep-sea anglerfish usually only rise from the depths when they're sick, dying, or pushed upward by shifting ocean conditions. Here's a rare view of the insane intricacies of a computer chip. What you're looking at is a maze of microscopic pathways where billions of transistors switch on and off to process every command a device makes. The structures are engineered at a scale smaller than wavelengths of visible light, pushing the limits of modern manufacturing. Because of how abstract it looks at this level, it's often cited as an example of alien technology. That was a digital recreation of images, since a standard optical microscope can't resolve details that small. In order to actually see structures at that level in video format, you would need an extremely high-powered electron microscope. In 1997, Bill Cosby's son Ennis was killed in a failed robbery attempt while he was changing a tire. Cosby was working toward his doctorate in special education and planned on building a school for children with disabilities. In 1971, a thief broke into a home and was shot in the legs by a trap set by the homeowner. The thief then sued the homeowner for damages and won. In 1999, a 26-year-old Polish man murdered his father with a screwdriver before making a mask out of his face. He then put on the mask along with his father's clothes and had his grandfather over for breakfast. Due to his poor hearing and eyesight, the old man swore he was talking to his son the entire time. The crime was only discovered when the grandfather found his son's body and called police. The killer was deemed clinically insane after claiming that the murder was an artistic work. The murder of 6-year-old beauty queen JonBenet Ramsey is one of the most baffling cases in American history, and the details are far darker than most people realize. On Christmas night in 1996, her parents found a bizarre 3-page ransom note demanding $118,000, the exact amount of her father's recent bonus, written on paper from inside their own home. Hours later, JonBenet's father reportedly discovered her body in the basement, strangled with a homemade garrote made from one of her mother's paintbrushes, her skull fractured, and her wrists loosely tied as if staged. There are also signs of possible sexual trauma, suggesting she may have been assaulted before or after death. Meanwhile, the autopsy revealed partially digested pineapple in her stomach, even though her parents claimed she went straight to bed that night. A bowl of pineapple with her brother Burke's fingerprints was later found on the kitchen table. There were no footprints in the snow outside, suggesting the killer never entered or left the house. Police later learned the basement window was already broken and the family never fixed it. The most popular theory today is that JonBenet was accidentally killed by her older brother Burke during a sudden outburst, possibly over the pineapple, and that their parents staged the ransom note and crime scene to protect him. This theory, while never proven, explains many of the inconsistencies in the evidence. But despite massive media attention, DNA tests, false confessions, and countless theories involving intruders, cover-ups, and family secrets, no one has ever been charged. Nearly 30 years later, the case still remains unsolved. In 2005, Leo DiCaprio was attending a private party when an uninvited guest, 40-year-old Aretha Wilson, suddenly smashed a glass bottle and slashed him across the face and neck. She was reportedly drunk, furious, and believed DiCaprio was her ex-boyfriend, the same man who was hosting the party. The attack left Leo covered in blood, inches from having his jugular vein severed, and required 17 stitches to close the wounds. Instead of staying to face the consequences, Wilson fled the country and hid in Canada for 5 years. She was eventually extradited back to the US, where she pleaded no contest to assault with a deadly weapon and was sentenced to 2 years in prison, an incredibly light punishment considering she almost killed one of the most famous actors in the world over mistaken identity. Robert Lawrence Jr. made history in 1967 as America's first black astronaut, and he did it with unmatched skill. He held a PhD, was one of the Air Force's top test pilots, and was on track to become the first black man in space. At his first press conference, a reporter tried to joke by asking if he'd have to sit in the back of the spacecraft, and Lawrence shut it down with, "We're all officers, we all sit in the front." But less than a year later, his life was cut short during a high-speed training mission when another pilot misjudged a maneuver. Lawrence ejected, but his parachute failed to deploy properly, and he slammed into the ground, dying instantly at just 32 years old. The program was canceled soon after, and Robert Lawrence Jr.'s name was nearly lost to history. In May of 2020, UConn student Peter Manfredonia was having issues with his motorcycle. When two elderly gentlemen approached to help him, Peter pulled out a samurai sword and murdered one man while seriously injuring the other. He then circled around them multiple times with his bike before stealing another man's pickup truck and fleeing to his hometown. That's when he murdered his childhood friend and kidnapped the victim's girlfriend before driving south. Once he reached New Jersey, he fled the car alone and started walking on foot. Manfredonia's actions quickly sparked a massive manhunt that spanned multiple states and garnered national attention. However, it became increasingly difficult to locate the killer since this was during the peak of the pandemic, allowing him to easily conceal his face with a mask. After a week-long search, Peter was finally apprehended in Maryland. He was later diagnosed with multiple mental illnesses that caused him to suddenly snap. He received a 55-year prison sentence for his crimes and then apparently gained 200 pounds while in prison. This was the moment a 7-Eleven was destroyed during a brazen Christmas Eve ATM theft in Texas. In the early morning hours of December 24, 2025, surveillance footage from a 7-Eleven near Fort Worth shows two suspects smashing through the front of the store, attaching a cable to the ATM, and using a stolen SUV to violently rip the machine through the building. After destroying half the store, the suspects fled, abandoning the ATM and SUV nearby and still remain unidentified. There's a tree in Pakistan that's been chained and officially arrested since 1898. This happened when a drunk British officer thought the tree was moving towards him and ordered one of his men to arrest it. 3 Nigerian men were arrested at Oran International Airport in Algeria after trying to fly to Dubai disguised as Arab women. Wrapped in hijabs, niqabs, and heavy makeup, they tried to slip through security, but officers noticed their documents didn't match and spotted stubble beneath the veils. A quick secondary check exposed the trio immediately, and they were taken into custody on the spot. This was the horrifying moment when Jane Goodall uncovered the savage truth behind chimpanzees. In the 1970s, Goodall and her team witnessed a shocking 4-year conflict known today as the Gombe Chimpanzee War. A single chimp community in Tanzania split into 2 rival factions, and the carnage that followed shattered the long-held belief that chimps were peaceful creatures. The war started when 6 males ambushed a lone rival and tore him to shreds, and over the next few years, the stronger group carried out coordinated raids in which every male of the weaker side was hunted down and killed in brutal fashion. Females were beaten, kidnapped, and often murdered until the losing community was completely wiped out. For Goodall, who had once described her chimps as gentle and idyllic, the violence was devastating. She admitted to having constant nightmares about the carnage and about watching individuals she had known since infancy transform into cold-blooded killers. The scientific world was equally shaken. The war revealed that chimpanzees, like humans, are capable not only of affection and cooperation, but also of organized warfare, murder, and ruthless extermination. George Michael, who's known for the Christmas classic Last Christmas I Gave You My Heart, died on Christmas Day in 2016 from a heart condition. All of the characters in Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas were inspired by hallucinations he had during a fever that nearly killed him. In December of 1959, Dr. Harold Perelson murdered his wife with a hammer before taking his own life, all while his 2 little kids watched in horror. For the next 50 years afterwards, the home remained completely abandoned and untouched. Intruders over the years claim that the Christmas tree, unopened presents, and decorations could still be seen exactly as they were on that murderous night in 1959. While filming for The Grinch, the thick makeup and prosthetics made Jim Carrey feel like he was buried alive each day. It became so brutal for him that they had to hire a former CIA agent to teach him techniques for coping with torture. In 1932 Arizona, a man dressed as Santa Claus jumped from a plane to parachute into a Christmas parade. Sadly, his parachute failed to open, and hundreds of parents had to cover their kids' eyes as Santa plummeted to his death. South Park's Mr. Hanky the Christmas Pooh originated when Trey Parker was potty training at age 4. His father always told him that if he didn't flush his Mr. Hanky, it would come to life and murder him in his sleep. In 2018, a 66-year-old Canadian man was arrested for murdering 8 people over a 7-year span. During that time, he worked as a mall Santa in Toronto. Many of the indoor scenes in the movie Elf were shot inside an abandoned mental asylum in Canada. The Grinch as a kid was played by an 18-year-old actor with dwarfism. Sadly, he died of heart failure just 2 years after the movie released. There's a convincing fan theory that suggests Kevin McAllister from Home Alone grew up to become the serial killer Jigsaw from the Saw movie franchise. On Christmas Eve in 2008, Bruce Pardo entered his in-laws' California home while dressed as Santa Claus. But instead of giving his family a festive surprise, Bruce unleashed hell. He crashed the party of 25 people and took 9 lives, either by shooting them or dousing them in flames with his homemade flamethrower. With his Santa suit melted to his skin from the fire, he drove to his brother's house and turned the gun on himself. Back in 1922, children suffering from diabetic ketoacidosis were kept in large wards. Grieving family members would visit their comatose children and sit by their beds, waiting for their inevitable deaths. But one day, 3 scientists walked into one of these wards and began injecting the children with a new purified extract called insulin. Before they had reached the last comatose patient, the first few that they injected started waking up, and a room of death turned into a place of joy. After surviving a fire, Taka the Shiba Inu is now a therapy dog for burn victims. In 2010, 7-year-old Stella Bernston drowned in some icy water in Sweden. Her body was found 4 hours later by a rescue helicopter and she was taken to the nearest hospital. Despite her body being only 13 degrees Celsius, doctors managed to save Stella by slowly warming her. These are what the vestigial limbs of a beluga whale look like. When sailors first explored the Arctic waters, they understandably mistook beluga whales for real-life mermaids. These are what the muscles look like on a fully grown male Siberian tiger. This rare orchid, known as the flower of the Holy Spirit, only blooms once per year. It looks like a group of praying saints before blooming, but once it blooms, it turns into a flying dove. That was when 25-year-old Erica Mae Butts was hyperventilating in court after receiving a life sentence for the death of 3-year-old Serenity Richardson in 2011. Prosecutors said the girl was repeatedly abused inside a South Carolina home, including being struck with a belt several times after wetting herself. When she was finally taken to the hospital, doctors documented extreme bruising and severe injuries across her body, and she later died from the trauma. Serenity had been left in Erica's care while her mother was trying to relocate. Another woman living in the home, Shanita Latrice Cunningham, was also charged in the case. Both women entered guilty pleas to homicide by child abuse and were sentenced to life in prison. They responded by collapsing in the courtroom, making a scene and crying hysterically before being dragged out. Joe DiMaggio was so devastated when Marilyn Monroe died that he brought flowers to her grave 3 times a week for more than 20 years. He never remarried, and his last words were, "I'll finally get to see Marilyn." Tokyo University's Medical Pathology Museum has a collection of 105 full-body tattoo skins. In the year 2000, a group of therapists were attempting to treat 10-year-old Candace Newmaker's attachment disorder. They were trying a controversial method known as rebirthing. Candace was first wrapped in flannels to represent a womb. She was then sat on by 4 grown adults and was told to free herself. Within 20 minutes, she started screaming and vomiting, but they continued the treatment. Nearly an hour later, she was dead. Tom and Eileen Longergan were a young couple from Louisiana on a vacation in the Coral Sea off the coast of Australia. They were scuba diving with a large group in the open ocean and were accidentally left behind. By the time someone realized they were missing, it was too late, and the couple was never found. This is a series of cat paintings by famous artist Louis Wayne from the early 1900s. They capture a slow descent into the varying levels of his schizophrenic episodes. After watching a documentary about women being tortured and killed in a basement, Katrina McGaw realized she was actually living in the same apartment. In 1976, 7 armed men broke into Bob Marley's home and attempted to assassinate him. Bob was shot in the chest and the arm but survived. His wife Rita was shot in the head but also survived thanks to her thick dreadlocks slowing down the bullet. Marley's manager claimed that the CIA was behind the assassination attempt. In 1894, a priest in Germany saved a little boy from drowning. That little boy was Adolf Hitler. In many of his later portraits, Napoleon Bonaparte can be seen with his hand over his stomach. This is because he suffered from severe abdominal pain due to what we can identify today as stomach cancer. It is believed that he died from the cancer at the age of 51. JFK's little sister Rosemary was born mentally ill, and the Kennedy family didn't want to be embarrassed by her. So they paid a surgeon to perform a lobotomy on her when she turned 23. During a lobotomy, the surgeon would shove a metal rod into the skull through the eye socket and scramble the frontal lobe. Rosemary was awake the whole time, and doctors asked her questions while they were cutting away at her brain. When she suddenly stopped verbally responding, they ended the surgery. Following the operation, Rosemary Kennedy was never able to walk or talk again. She was institutionalized for the rest of her life until she died at the age of 86. Per Olin, better known by his stage name Dead, was the lead singer for the Norwegian black metal band Mayhem. At the age of 10, he was attacked by some bullies who left him so badly injured that he was declared clinically dead for a few minutes. After this incident, he began an unhealthy obsession for everything related to death. He collected dead birds, performed using corpse paint, and would even routinely cut himself while on stage. Dead was believed to have suffered from Cotard syndrome, a mental disorder characterized by the belief that you are truly dead and don't exist in reality. In 1991, he committed suicide by slitting his wrists and throat before shooting himself in the forehead with a shotgun. He left a suicide note that was very brief because he didn't believe that he was alive in the first place. Here's a video showing exactly what not to do during a grease fire. I don't know if this is a moment of true horror or true stupidity.
Turn it off! Turn it, what the fuck? What do I do? Bro, turn it off! Turn it off! Tanner, hurry up! Tanner, turn it off! Tanner, turn it off! I don't know what to do! Grab! 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 Tanner! Grab it! Tanner! Oh my god, Tanner! What is it? Tanner! What is it? Oh my god, Tanner! I don't know what it is! It's got this!
Instead of standing around like deer in headlights while the fire kept growing, the solution here was actually pretty simple. The obvious first move should have been turning the burner off immediately. As long as the heat stays on, the flames keep feeding. Immediately after that, they should have grabbed a larger pot, a metal lid, or even a baking tray and covered the pan completely. No oxygen means no fire. You don't throw water on it, you don't move it, and you definitely don't dump it across the kitchen. What ends up happening works out purely by luck, not because it was smart. Dumping a burning pan can spread flaming oil everywhere. And that's usually how small kitchen fires turn into house fires. Grease fires look chaotic, but the solution is simple. Kill the heat, cover it, leave it alone. Eminem's track Brain Damage was inspired by his real-life childhood bully, D'Angelo Bailey. In an interview, Bailey once boasted about beating Eminem so severely that it caused the concussion, bleeding from the ears, and temporary vision loss. In 2001, Bailey tried suing Eminem for slander over the song, but the case was thrown out by the judge, who delivered the ruling in the form of a rap. This photo from 1977 shows a Rhodesian soldier interrogating a group of captured rebels. The men had to hold this position until they talked, and the first one to fall would receive a bullet in the forehead. In 1982, 7 people in the Chicago area randomly dropped dead after taking cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules. The incident changed packaging laws forever, but the killer was never caught. In 2021, a 39-year-old man was reported missing in Barcelona. Days later, his rotting corpse was found stuck inside a papier-mâché dinosaur statue located outside of an abandoned movie theater. He'd somehow dropped his phone inside of the statue, crawled in to retrieve it, got stuck, and died upside down. This little girl was diagnosed with dementia before she even turned 4. When Sophia Scott was 3 years old, her parents noticed her speaking and development were going backwards. The day before her 4th birthday, doctors told her family she had Sanfilippo syndrome, a rare genetic disease that prevents the body from breaking down certain sugars, causing them to build up in the brain and slowly destroy the nervous system. They were told there was no treatment and that she was unlikely to survive past her teenage years. Sophia developed mostly normally at first, but around age 6 she began to decline. Over time, she lost her speech, memory, and her ability to walk and care for herself. She later developed seizures, sleep apnea, scoliosis, bowel problems, and more than 30 different symptoms. Sanfilippo syndrome is often called childhood Alzheimer's, and most children begin showing symptoms between ages 1 and 4, usually dying in their teens. Now 15 years old, Sophia has lost much of her abilities. Her family continues searching for experimental treatment, but doctors believe it may be too late to reverse the damage. In the final stages of this disease, the brain forgets how to control basic functions like swallowing and breathing, and most patients die from complications such as pneumonia, respiratory failure, or cardiac arrest. When legendary baseball player Ted Williams died in 2002, his head was cryogenically frozen by the Alcor Life Extension Foundation so that he could potentially be revived in the future. But according to a former employee, his severed head was badly mishandled and allegedly used for batting practice with a wrench inside of the lab. Alcor has denied these dark allegations. In Washington state, a man tried to heat up a lava lamp on his stovetop for unknown reasons. The lamp exploded like a grenade, sending a shard of glass into his chest and puncturing his heart. He was found dead on his kitchen floor, surrounded by wax and broken glass. In 2016, a woman from China was found mummified inside an elevator at her apartment complex. A power outage had shut the lift down and no one realized she was inside. After power returned, no one checked the elevator for more than a month, and at some point she likely died from dehydration. When maintenance workers finally found her body, her hands were completely mangled and claw marks were found inside the elevator, as she desperately attempted to pry the doors open to free herself. A 42-year-old British woman received over $70,000 in donations after setting up a GoFundMe to fund her cancer treatment. But it turned out she was a total fraud and was instead using the money to fund her lavish lifestyle and gambling addiction. When Disney released Princess and the Frog, it caused a minor salmonella outbreak across the country. Over 50 kids were hospitalized after kissing a frog. The heaviest human ever recorded weighed 1,400 pounds at his peak. He once lost over 900 pounds, only to gain it all back later in life. In the original Little Mermaid, the mermaid's feet constantly feel like she's walking on sharp knives. But the prince enjoys watching her dance, so she continues dancing for hours despite the excruciating pain. The prince then goes on to marry someone else and the mermaid takes her own life. Lacey Fletcher was a 36-year-old woman from Slaughter, Louisiana, who was found dead in January of 2022 after years of being left to rot on a couch in her parents' home. She suffered from severe autism and was reportedly nonverbal. When authorities arrived, Lacey's body was fused to the sofa, surrounded by years of human waste, insects, and mold. She only weighed about 96 pounds, had bed sores that exposed bone, and was covered in feces and maggots. Coroners ruled her death a homicide caused by severe neglect, starvation, and untreated medical conditions. Investigators determined she had likely been left in the same position for at least 12 years, slowly melting into the sofa while her parents lived in the house with her. Despite the horrific condition of her body and the prolonged suffering, her parents were initially charged with second-degree murder, but the charges were later reduced and ultimately dismissed by a judge in 2024, since the judge ruled that prosecutors couldn't prove that Lacey's parents intended to kill her or knowingly caused her death, triggering widespread public outrage over how such prolonged extreme neglect could result in no prison sentence. The scourged back is an 1863 photograph of an escaped enslaved man named Peter, also known as Gordon, taken after he reached a Union Army camp during the American Civil War. The image shows his back covered in thick keloid scars caused by repeated brutal whippings while enslaved on a Louisiana plantation. The scars were the result of agonizing abuse severe enough to permanently disfigure his skin. When the photograph was published and widely circulated in northern newspapers, it provided undeniable visual proof of the physical cruelty of slavery and became one of the most powerful abolitionist images of the 19th century. Brazilian girl Helena Valera was kidnapped as a child in the 1930s by members of the Yanomami, an isolated indigenous group living deep in the Amazon rainforest. She spent more than 20 years living among them, where she endured repeated violence, forced marriages, sexual abuse, and the killing of her children during tribal conflicts. After escaping back to Western society in 1956, she struggled to reintegrate and was treated as an outsider, never fully belonging to either world. Haunted by trauma, yet emotionally tied to the only life she truly knew, Valero eventually chose to return to live with indigenous tribes in the Amazon, remaining there until her death in 2003, a rare and unsettling case of someone voluntarily returning to a society that once abducted them. This was the moment a 5-year-old girl was attacked by a raccoon while waiting for her school bus in Connecticut. The animal suddenly bit into her leg, refusing to let go as she screamed and kicked. Hearing the screams, her mother ran outside and grabbed the raccoon with her bare hands, prying it off her daughter. She held on to the animal and restrained it as her daughter ran inside, keeping control of it while making sure another child nearby was no longer in danger. Once she was certain the situation was under control, the mother yeeted the raccoon away, ending the attack. The girl suffered multiple puncture wounds to her leg, though doctors later said her genes likely prevented far more serious damage. Raccoons almost never attack people, especially during daylight, and because of the animal's extreme aggression, doctors feared rabies exposure. Both the mother and daughter were required to undergo emergency rabies treatment, but they eventually made a full recovery. A 45-year-old woman named Christine Barnett adopted a 6-year-old girl in 2010. The woman was recently charged with abandoning her daughter in Indiana and fleeing to Canada back in 2013. However, Barnett claims that her daughter is actually a 22-year-old sociopath with dwarfism who is pretending to be a child. She also claims that the girl has attempted to kill her on multiple occasions. She says the girl has tried to push her into an electric fence, has poured bleach into her coffee, and has threatened to stab her in her sleep. The woman claims that the adoption was a scam and that the girl was actually born in 1989. In 1860, a 20-year-old woman named Rhoda Derry was sent to a mental hospital after growing up with no signs of mental health problems. But she had been acting strange lately and was believed to have been possessed by a demon. For the next few decades, she literally lived in a small basket, and her muscles became so weak that it became impossible for her to move her legs or hips. She eventually scratched at her eyes until she went blind, beat her face until her front teeth were knocked out, and lost the ability to speak. In 1904, she was finally transferred to a different asylum where she would die 2 years later. The young man on the left broke into his neighbor's house wielding a knife and threatened to kill the old man. But 72-year-old Frank Cordy happened to be a former boxing champion, and he gave the burglar a lawful beatdown. The Antwerp diamond heist in 2003 was one of the biggest robberies in history. A Belgian man stole $100 million in diamonds after bypassing 10 levels of high security. He had almost gotten away with it, but was convicted via DNA evidence on a salami sandwich that he'd left near the crime scene.